John Kahrs, you are the writer-director of the animated short film Age of Sail, which made it to the shortlist for this year's Oscars for Best Animated Short Film. It really is a beautiful, beautiful film. Where did the idea for this short film come from?
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Charlie. And yeah, it's really nice to be just included in the shortlisting. I think it's almost feeling like the honors of that are almost as much as the nomination, just from all the feedback I've been getting. But so that's been nice. But the story is it's an old one in my head. Like, it's been knocking around in my head for over 10 years, maybe longer. And it's like fragments of one story was, what if a girl fell overboard and got picked up by another boat, and what would that story be? And or what if a kid? It wasn't even specific, gender specific. And then the other part of the story I had was about a Navy captain that had like fallen, his career kind of fell apart, and he was a drunk that ran a cable ferry across a river, and this was the last vessel that he had. And then I think also I grew up sailing on the East Coast, so I kind of have that in my DNA a little bit, and my dad built some boats, and so I'm trying to like jam all those things together. I felt like at a certain point, okay, I need to use all these old fragments and put them somewhere, put them to good use, because I need to move on from them. So those are kind of the starting points for this, where the story came from.
And I think, other than striking story, I mean, the animation is absolutely just gorgeous. It feels like you're watching like an amalgam of animation types. It sort of looks, like hand drawn, and then there's also like CG elements, and then also like stop motion. It also looks like at certain points.
Right.
What was the process of animating that like?
Well, I think, my thing about animation these days, like especially now in the 21st century, is like it doesn't have to look any one way. And I think computer animation has had this almost photoreal look that they've been chasing after for a long time. So I think it's interesting to go in new directions. So we wanted to make it look kind of like a moving illustration. And so we looked at a lot of painters like Bernie Fuchs and a lot of illustrators from the golden age, from like the 1950s and 60s, that could be a guide for what this would feel like. But there's another reason that it looks the way it does, and I think it has to do with the fact that it's in VR, and all that stuff has to run in real time. It has to be this complete world that's like very much like a video game. It can't hiccup. It doesn't have time to render. It has to run in real time. So everything is very low polygon. It's very kind of crunchy looking. And we wanted to find a style that was like harmonious with that low poly technology. And so that it all looked like it came from the same design sense. So yeah, I mean, it is kind of trying to bridge the gap between CG and illustration and 2D. And I think I try my best, to like make it all feel like it belongs together. A lot of that has to do with Kevin Dart and Celine Derameau, who Celine is the production designer, but Kevin is just as much of a pivotal design force on this project as anybody. So.
And how was the style achieved of that? How do you achieve that style of animation?
Well, it's CG. I mean, they're full, computer rigs, the way you would do CG these days. But the way they're shaded and the way they're kind of colored and processed, and the edges are broken up, there's a lot of kind of very simple but very fast to process and clever little tricks that are done to kind of make it not feel CG. And a lot of that was done by this guy, Cassidy Curtis, who was really good at this, what's called non-photorealistic rendering techniques. Just pushing the CG look into a more illustrative style. And I think that's kind of creates the texture of the imagery. And then the way it moves is on twos, what they call on twos, which is a little more staccato, a little more like hiccupy and interrupted, like so that's where you get that kind of stop motion feel. And I felt like that would be also something that would fit the style as well.
So one of the things that I thought was really interesting about the short is, I having watched so many animated shorts, especially ones that have been nominated and qualified for the Oscars, is that this one has dialogue, and usually the shorts that get in here don't have any actual spoken dialogue.
Right.
And so I was wondering, was that a hard decision to make, to decide to include it, since sometimes it feels like a lot of animated short films specifically don't have dialogue?
Well, I've done the no dialogue thing, and I love that. I have so much respect for like a way of telling a story where you don't need the dialogue, or if you don't understand, like in Seven Samurai, if you don't understand the dialogue, you totally get that movie. And it's really long and epic and deep, and I think that's because the visual storytelling is really clear. So I love the craftsmanship of that, of visual storytelling, and Paperman was very much about that. I did a short film for Lyft called June that was basically had no dialogue, but I felt like this was VR, and I was feeling like VR was the stuff that I'd seen in VR didn't have a lot of dialogue. It didn't have, I wanted something that had characters that talked, and I wanted to have a little bit of star power. So that leads to the kind of Ian McShane calling a named actor for kind of the gravitas of that. But also there's another reason for doing dialogue, which is I wanted to be able to tell the story without forcing the audience to look at a certain spot all the time. And this also has to do with VR. Like if it's visual storytelling in VR, then you have to be looking at a certain place. But if it's 360, then you have no control over where the viewer is looking. You don't have that. You don't have the tools to do that kind of gentle direction of the audience. So I thought, if the audience is looking up at the sails or the sky or seeing the weather come in, they can still hear these two characters going back and forth and talking about what they want and what they are afraid of, and revealing these layers in their personalities and their stories that you wouldn't get through visuals. You can't really get that. You could get that in a visual storytelling way, but I felt like it would be clumsy and forced to do that in VR. So those are all the different reasons why I'm bringing in dialogue.
It's interesting. You talked about getting to be on the short list, but you are actually already an Oscar winner, as the film you brought up, Paperman, won, I guess it was 6 years ago, for Best Animated Short Film. What was it like to win an Oscar, for that movie 6 years ago?
It was great. I mean, obviously, it's really nice to win it. I do tell people a lot that, like, to be nominated and the way the Academy handles everything from that moment forward, I think that they already treat you like a king from the nomination forward, and they're just so welcoming, and there's all these cool events that they do, and you just feel like you're treated like you have this great value to them, and as a filmmaker, as a creative person, and you're in this kind of community, this little temporary community just for this short time of other creative people that are all kind of feeling like they're in the zeitgeist. And I loved that. So I felt like that was already enough. And then winning is like, the weird details about winning have a lot to do with like television programming. Like when you win, they whisk you away, and then you do all this other, like they do photos and like formal photos kind of, and they do a little press thing. So you're back there for like 40 minutes, and Jenny, my wife, was in her seat, and they have seat fillers to keep the audience looking full whenever they cut. If someone vacates their seat, they have someone jump in the seat, like a student or something will like sit there in a tuxedo. So she had a seat filler next to her for like 30 or 40 minutes. Like, where is he? I thought he won. What happened to this guy? But eventually I came back and we finished out the show. But it was, it's a great honor. It's just a great honor.
And I'm sorry, my mind just went blank there for a second. So, so you did mention that that it was an honor to be shortlisted, and I was just wondering if you could just elaborate on that, being shortlisted for this kind of very unique short film. For the Academy sometimes, which is looked at as an organization that can be very slow to catch up with the times, to embrace this kind of project.
Yeah, well, I think animation is one of those categories where I don't think they're that slow anymore right now. I think they're keeping pace pretty nicely. But in animation, in that category in particular, there's always something kind of experimental and a little harder hitting. And the community that votes for the short list or votes for the nomination or does the nomination, they're very much, I think, connected to the traditionalist part of it and the very cutting edge part of it. And I feel like that's what Age of Sail is, kind of like very traditionalist. It doesn't have any, even though it's a VR thing, it's a very linear story. And I did a very kind of traditionalist way of cutting and directing the 2D version of it, the theatrical version of it. And I think the hard hitting, like, high tech part of it, it more has to do with the technology and the way I feel like animation can look. But yeah, I mean, I'm very happy that they recognize all that. I mean, all the shortlisted picks are pretty interesting, each in their own way.
Well, I'm sure this is just a thrilling experience, and it just sort of it really is just something to experience. It's just so it's hard to explain, but it's really just such a unique experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we wish you all the best this season, and we thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Charlie. It's been a pleasure. Good luck.